Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Fridays. The topic of today's video is going to be tips for dealing with an anxious attachment style. If you're unfamiliar with the attachment styles, there's a lot of research and history behind them, and I've put a few links in the description if you're interested in diving further. The theory goes that there are 4 predominant attachment styles: anxious, avoidant, disorganized, and secure. And our attachment style, meaning the way in which we build relationships, our subconscious attitudes and expectations for relationships, and therefore our behavior in relationships, are influenced by factors that stem back to our childhood. Before I go any further, I'd advise you not to overthink attachment theory. Not everyone needs to look into it, but if you have noticed certain potentially unhealthy patterns and behaviors on your part in your relationships, be it romantic, friendship, family, or work, especially if you find yourself acting somewhat differently in one category of those relationships as opposed to how you act in the other categories of those relationships, and you can't really work out why, then attachment theory might be something worth looking into. It certainly was really helpful for me. I would say that I've definitely struggled with anxious attachment style in mostly my romantic relationships for about 7 years, give or take. And I still have to be careful to make sure that those tendencies aren't creeping in these days, and they sometimes do because I'm human. So I am well aware of how debilitating it can be to operate in and maintain healthy relationships when the anxious attachment feels like it's steering the brain, especially when you're unaware that it is doing so. So here are a few tips on how I personally took control of it to make sure that it didn't rule my life as much. And I'll just mention that this involved going to therapy for 2 years on my part. Can't plug therapy enough. I've done it a lot on this channel. And I've also spent a lot of time looking into attachment theory myself because I generally find it very fascinating. Anxious attachment, which is what we'll be focusing on in today's video, is the overly dependent style of attachment. With anxious attachment, one of the tendencies that you might have is that you tend to cling on to people excessively, sometimes with the incorrect belief that you cannot live without them. If you have this style of attachment, it could point to something deeper like negative self-image or low self-esteem, and that typically comes with an overly positive view of others. So with anxious attachment, your brain sort of believes that others can do no wrong and you are the one who is doing everything wrong. This leads to a tendency to seek approval, validation, and your own self-worth from your partner or your friends, which can then send you into a tailspin when you don't get that validation, or worse, if that partner or friend decides to leave your life. Of course, with the subconscious tendency to place others on pedestals with the subconscious belief that they can do no wrong, something that can tend to happen with this attachment style is that the person you're subconsciously idealizing starts to feel trapped by these inexplicably high standards that you've placed on them, because they can sense your dependency and that probably makes them want to flee. And of course, when that begins to happen, the individual who has the anxious attachment style can sense their partner pulling away, which then in turn makes them even more anxious, and that feeds into the fear of imminent abandonment. So obviously in relationships, you generally want to be operating in a way that's going to be loving the other person you're in the relationship with in the best way that you know how and in the way that they deserve. The subconscious behavior that comes with having an anxious attachment style is not fair to the other person because it places unrealistic expectations on them that no human being could possibly fulfill. Because think about it, with anxious attachment, the belief is that they are your entire sense of security and safety. They are supposed to provide your entire sense of self-worth. They are the only antidote to the anxiety that you feel when you're not physically with them. The lies that the anxious attachment style tends to feed our brain makes us believe that we need constant communication, constant affection, and constant reassurance that the relationship is fine. That is far too much to put on someone else, and it generally can only lead to problems in the relationship. A healthy relationship exists when both partners are able to find their sense of self-worth and identity and safety from other sources, ideally within themselves, so that rather than one partner treating the other like their oxygen, both partners can relax and feel at ease with a proportionate sense of detachment. So if you're in a relationship where you find yourself constantly craving contact with the person when you're not around them, and if they go a day without contacting you and you start to panic, your entire mood drops and you start to think thoughts like, they've gotten over me, they've realized how trash I really am, they're going to leave me. And then that affects your ability to work, to eat, to live a healthy life, then you might be operating with an anxious attachment style. By the way, you are not trash. I have to say that. If you crave a constant level of affection, communication, and reassurance from your partner, and when you don't get that from them, you internalize the message that it's because you're not worthy of love, which has evolved over time into a crippling fear of rejection, then you might be operating with an anxious attachment style. But make sure you read into it more via the links that I provided in the description, or through your own research, because it's very nuanced and it's not a good idea to prematurely diagnose yourself with these things. If you find that you have an anxious attachment style, it does not mean that you are inherently broken. It's just terminology to help us understand the neural pathways that have been wired due to our past experience. But what's awesome is neuroplasticity exists. In other words, you can rewire your neural pathways, and I've certainly done this. I'm still in the process of doing it, and I don't consider myself to be currently operating with an anxious attachment style, though I was for many years. So it is possible to navigate and to get through. It does not have to define you or your relationships. My anxious attachment style had me believing for years that I was not worthy of true, authentic, selfless love from any individual, and that true love could only be given conditionally. As a result, I prioritized the other person's needs 1,000 times more than my own needs, and I constantly chose the desires of the other person over my own, even if it meant staying completely silent about deep, painful emotions that I was having. This was because I believed that I deserved to feel those negative emotions because I was somehow subpar to everyone else in the world and therefore deserved love less. This meant that over time, I actually found myself with very low self-esteem, no sense of self-worth, and no idea who I was without a partner. But the good news is that I became aware of my problematic patterns in my mental health and my behavior in relationships. I learned about attachment theory, and I discovered that millions of other people were experiencing the same thing that I was. Even some of my friends who I believed were like the best people in the world. This is when I did a deep dive into the brain. I discovered things like neural pathways and neuroplasticity, and learned that I could actually reprogram my brain to escape those narratives that I'd believed for years. That I didn't have to live this way forever, and best of all, that I could actually be just as worthy of love as everyone else. So with that being said, here are my tips for navigating anxious attachment and making sure that it does not rule your relationships. First of all, acknowledge that it could be something that you're struggling with. Mental health professionals for years have been saying that the first step to healing is to acknowledge the problem in the first place, because in doing so, you've already beat one of the most powerful enemies, which is denial. A lot of people go on with problematic behavioral tendencies because they tell themselves, this is just how I love. I can't help it. Accept who I am or leave. Yes, of course, we should be kind to others who are working through things, and that takes time, but we are all responsible for working through our own things. So if you've acknowledged the thing, if you've acknowledged the problem, you've already likely made a big difference in how your future is going to pan out. So good on you if you've done that. It's okay if that's all you've done for now. Secondly, acknowledge that it is likely deeply rooted fear and anxiety that is driving the anxious attachment style. These two things are demons. They are not you. They do not define you, and they can be overcome. That's important to acknowledge. Number 3, if you can, go to therapy and start diving into those deeper roots of those fears and insecurities. Go through the pain of working through them so that you can begin to correctly and chronologically archive those memories neatly away where they belong in your timeline. I know it's hard to get to therapy. Sometimes it can be really expensive. The good news is there are a lot of books you can read that can help you to do the same work. Number 4, communicate your needs to your partner. This is something that is genuinely terrifying to do, and to be honest, I still struggle with it sometimes. This is because we have been taught to believe genuinely that our feelings don't matter and that they are an inconvenience to the people that we love. But this is not true. So in doing the act of actually saying the feelings out loud to our partner or friend or whoever it is, we are contradicting those lies that our brain is telling us that communication is always a terrifying thing. 5, spend time alone. Get to know yourself again, preferably with a journal. It is so important to spend time alone if you have anxious attachment style, because in doing so, you are teaching yourself that you can depend on yourself, not others. Engage in deep introspection, prayer, meditation, go on retreats, whatever it takes to begin the work of believing that you are enough, which you are. And I mentioned keeping a journal because that can help you to externalize and document your feelings and needs, which is something you've probably learned to believe is not an important thing for you to do. When I say journal, sometimes what I do when I need to just vent a feeling out is I just have a Word document open and I'll type it out so that it doesn't take too much time. You can let your fingers do the work, just run it all off, delete it after if you want. It's so nice to externalize feelings so that you can begin to make sense of them, and then in a couple of days you can read over them and sift through what's irrational, what's rational, what's fair, what's unfair, what's unhealthy, etc. Number 6, this is the coolest thing ever. I've actually found that through consistency and effort, a lot of it, albeit, I have actually been able to learn secure attachment behaviors and thought patterns. By identifying which thoughts are fair and healthy and which are irrational and unhealthy, sorting through those with myself or a close girlfriend, a good friend you can go to vent or to talk out your feelings is so good for anxious attachment. I can't even express. And then after that, choosing to act in a way that is not reflective of my anxious attachment. We have so much power to rewire those neural pathways just by being aware of our thoughts and choosing different behaviors, even if they feel very unnatural to us, which they will. This is the most effective means that I have found of overcoming those problematic anxious attachment behaviors. Let me give you an example of this. Think of those times where you desperately want to text or make contact with someone because you want to feel loved or validated by them. It's okay to text someone who helps to make you feel loved, don't get me wrong, but I'm talking about a disproportionate dependence on the person. Choosing to act contrary to the lies that our brain is feeding us in those moments would be to deliberately choose to not text the person who we know is going to give us the dopamine hit when we are craving love. Because if you do give in and text them, which you're human, it's gonna happen, that's fine. Get on the horse, start again. Because if you do text them and they don't reply, that's going to further feed into and trigger your anxious attachment wound. Instead, pause and look inward for a second and ask yourself, why am I sending this text? Am I sending it mostly to fill a void, to feel needed, for validation? If the answer is yes, don't send the text. Then ask yourself, would a completely healthy version of me with secure attachment send this text? If the answer is no, don't send the text. Gradually, over time, implementing these strategies will give your brain enough pieces of data to believe that the opposite of these lies is true, that you can find love and self-respect on your own, and that you do have control over your behavior. This is the amazing work of neuroplasticity. It is incredible and it works. So that is it for my tips. Now I do want to say, don't feel disheartened if you can relate to some of the stuff that I've talked about in this video. I still relate to some of the stuff that I've talked about in this video. It can be really hard to do the work. It is really hard to do the work, but remember, you are the only one who has to live with your brain for the rest of your life. And if you don't do the work, no one's gonna do it for you. And although it's difficult and it takes time, the sooner you start, the better. The less scary it becomes. Because unfortunately, this stuff doesn't just go away. But we are all worthy of love, and our people in our lives are also worthy of being loved well by us. So yes, it's hard, but take my word for it, it gets easier. And I believe in you. Do you have any thoughts on this topic, or you just want to share your experience about your anxious attachment style or something related with others? Drop a comment below and make sure to take a look at the links in the description of this video if you're interested in doing a further deep dive into the attachment styles. Are you a T that made it to the end of this video? Let us know in the comments. Until next time, guys, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you have a wonderful day. Bye.